The winds howled through the barren chapel as the priest's voice echoed in the hall. Amid the soft murmur of guests, a woman stood frozen, her hand gripping the bouquet so tightly that her knuckles turned white. It was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, but now the air was thick with something darker. The moment the priest spoke the words, "I do," he turned to the woman beside her, and the ring slid onto another's finger. The world paused as gasps filled the room. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. The groom, once her fiancé, only offered a cold, distant gaze before turning his back on her. Her heart shattered as the wedding, which was meant to bind them forever, became the bitterest betrayal. The guests watched in silence, too stunned to move or speak. Her world had just crumbled, leaving only a hollow ache inside her chest. A heavy silence enveloped the room, and all eyes were on her as the reality of the moment sank in. She stood there, her chest heaving with breath she couldn't seem to control. It wasn't just the broken promise. It was the crushing realization that every moment she had shared with him had been a lie. The woman beside him, her smile wide and triumphant, was a stranger to her, yet she felt as if her entire existence had been rewritten in that instant. He had betrayed her. The pain was unbearable, a knot tightening in her throat. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Instead, a single tear traced down her cheek, catching the sunlight as it fell. The ringing silence was broken by the sharp sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Her best friend, who had stood beside her as a bridesmaid only moments before, rushed to her side. "Come on, let's go," she said, her voice soft but firm, pulling the bride away from the altar. But the woman's feet felt as though they were rooted to the floor. She couldn't move. "He wasn't worth it," her friend whispered, but the words felt hollow. How could anyone truly understand what it meant to be left at the altar, to have the person you trusted with your entire heart walk away with someone else? She finally moved, her steps slow and uncertain, as if her body was no longer hers to control. The cold stone floor felt sharp against her bare feet, and every step echoed in the empty chapel. The world outside seemed so far away, as though she were walking in a dream. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead, never looking back at the man who had promised to love her forever. But as she neared the door, a soft, dark figure appeared in her peripheral vision. She froze, her heart skipping a beat as a tall man, draped in a dark cloak, appeared in her line of sight. His presence was overwhelming, his gaze intense, but his face was obscured by shadows. The man's voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight of authority. "Leave this place. You do not belong here anymore." His words cut through the air like a blade. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but all she could do was nod. A strange calm overtook her, and she stepped toward the door. As she did, a strange sensation washed over her, as though she had just crossed into another world, one where nothing was as it seemed. The door swung open before her, and she stepped into the unknown. The world outside the chapel felt alien to her now. The wind tugged at the hem of her gown, but she barely noticed as her feet led her down an empty street. The noise of the city, once so familiar, now felt distant, as though she were walking through a dream. Her mind kept replaying the images from inside, the groom's cold face, the ring sliding onto another woman's finger, the feeling of betrayal, and the utter loneliness that had filled her heart. How had she not seen it coming? The signs had been there all along, but she had ignored them, blinded by love. As she walked aimlessly, the tears came once more, unbidden, tracing new paths down her cheeks. It wasn't just him that had broken her, it was herself for believing in something that was never meant to be. She wiped her eyes, trying to push the pain away, but it clung to her like a second skin, suffocating her every breath. Her future had just been torn apart, and she had no idea how to pick up the pieces. Her feet carried her to the edge of a park, where a bench sat beneath a tall, aged oak tree. She collapsed onto the bench, her chest heavy with the weight of everything she had just lost. The sound of the wind rustling through the leaves seemed to mock her sorrow. She had always imagined that her life would unfold like a fairy tale, that the man she loved would be there beside her forever. But now, Everything she had believed in felt like a lie. "Why?" she whispered, not to anyone in particular, but to the empty space around her. Why did this happen? Her heart was raw, and the world seemed unforgiving, as though every part of it conspired to remind her of her failure. The ache inside her was unbearable, and yet there was a strange sense of release. She had been holding on to him for so long, trying to make something work that never should have. But that didn't make the pain any easier to bear. She closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely as she let the night embrace her. Just as she thought she couldn't endure another moment of silence, the sound of footsteps broke through the heavy stillness. She didn't look up, convinced that it was just another stranger passing by. But the footsteps slowed as they approached, and then they stopped right in front of her. "Are you okay?" The voice was low, calm, and unfamiliar. She looked up to find a man standing there, tall, with a mysterious air about him. His features were sharp, his eyes dark and intense, and yet there was an undeniable kindness in his gaze. She didn't answer immediately. How could she? What could she possibly say? "No," she finally whispered, her voice barely a sound. "I'm not okay." The man's expression softened, and he sat down beside her without asking. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city's noise seemed to fade as the two of them sat in the quiet of the night. The man didn't need to say anything more. He simply offered her a presence, a brief reprieve from the pain that consumed her. The silence stretched on, but it was no longer oppressive. In the presence of this stranger, the woman found herself breathing a little easier, her chest no longer as tight. She hadn't expected to feel so at ease next to someone she'd never met, but somehow, his presence was a balm to her soul. "Do you ever feel like your life is slipping through your fingers?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He nodded, a deep sadness crossing his face as he looked away, clearly lost in his own thoughts. "Yes," he said simply. "But that's when you know it's time to change things." She turned to face him, curiosity sparking despite the pain that still gripped her heart. "And how do you change it?" she asked. His lips curved upward slightly, but there was no humor in it. "You have to let go of what you can't control, even if it hurts." She exhaled sharply, thinking about his words. How many times had she held on to something she shouldn't have, trying to make it work, trying to fix what was broken? Maybe it was time to let go. They sat together for what felt like hours, talking, or sometimes just being. She shared a bit about her life, her dreams, and the crushing heartbreak she had just experienced. He listened, never interrupting, never judging. There was something comforting in the way he simply allowed her to speak, as though all of her pain was valid and real. "Thank you," she whispered as the night began to fade, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. The man looked at her, his gaze steady. "You're not alone," he said softly. His words were simple, but they carried a weight that settled deep within her. For the first time since the wedding, she felt like there might be hope again, like maybe she could find her way forward. The pain wouldn't disappear overnight, but at least now she didn't feel so completely alone. The man stood up, offering her a hand. She took it without hesitation, rising to her feet. "It's time to move forward," he said. And for the first time, she believed him. The days blurred into weeks, and though she tried to move on, her heart remained tethered to the memory of him, the groom who had broken her. It was as if the betrayal was etched into every part of her, a scar that wouldn't heal. She had returned to her life, yes, but nothing felt the same. The city, once so full of promise, now seemed like a maze of painful memories. She kept busy, working long hours at the cafe where she'd found solace in the rhythm of daily life. There were moments, too many of them, when the weight of the past came crashing down on her. She'd pass a street corner where they used to walk together, or see a couple holding hands, and it would take everything she had not to crumble. Her best friend had warned her that healing wasn't a straight path, but it didn't make the days easier. What hurt the most was the anger she felt, not just toward him, but toward herself, for not seeing the truth sooner. Was this all her fault? One evening, as she closed up the cafe, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was him, the man who had sat with her under the oak tree weeks ago, offering her comfort. She hadn't seen him since that night, but the sight of him now sent a rush of emotions through her, a mix of confusion and longing. "I know it's been a while," he said softly, stepping closer. "I didn't mean to disappear, but I had to take care of something." She looked at him, unsure of what to say. Her heart beat faster as she noticed the same intensity in his eyes as before, that same quiet strength that had drawn her in. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady, though she could feel the heat rise to her cheeks. The man smiled faintly, taking a step back. "I've been thinking about what you said," he replied. "About moving forward." She nodded, unsure of what he meant, but before she could speak, he continued. "I can't promise everything will be easy, but if you're willing, we can figure this out together." The man returned to the cafe nearly every night after that, but they never spoke much. The silence between them was often more comforting than words could ever be. Yet, every time he left, her thoughts seemed to follow him, lingering in the quiet hours after she closed the cafe. She found herself reflecting on what he had said about moving forward, how difficult it was to let go of the past when everything inside her screamed to hold on. She had spent so many nights crying over the man who had broken her heart, yet she couldn't seem to get rid of the ache that remained. His betrayal had left a scar deeper than she could have imagined, and it was hard to believe that anyone else could ever fill that void. But this stranger, this man who barely knew her, was offering something she hadn't expected. He was offering a chance at something new, at healing. "Why do you care?" she asked him one night, her voice trembling as she wiped the counter. "You don't even know me." He met her eyes with a steady gaze, the answer in his look more than in words. "I know what it's like to feel lost," he said simply. "And sometimes that's enough." Days turned into weeks, and still, he kept showing up. He never pressured her, never pushed for more than what she was willing to give. Slowly, the tightness in her chest began to loosen. She didn't know what was happening between them, but something had changed. His presence wasn't a reminder of the past, it felt like the first step toward a future she hadn't dared to imagine. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, to the way he listened, without judgment. He had a way of making her feel heard in a world that seemed so quick to ignore. One evening, as they sat together, she spoke of the wedding, the devastation of it, the pain she had carried for so long. She had never told anyone the full story, but with him, it felt different. He didn't look at her with pity, but with understanding. "You're stronger than you realize," he said, his voice low and kind. "But you can't keep holding on to the past. It'll only keep you from what's waiting for you." Weeks had passed since the night they spoke of moving forward. The city felt different now, as if the fog that had clouded her mind had finally begun to lift. She found herself thinking less about him, the man who had betrayed her, and more about the possibility of something new, something real. It was terrifying. Letting go was never easy. But the man, who had once been a stranger, had become someone she found herself turning to. "I think I'm ready," she said one evening, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I think I'm ready to let go." He looked at her, a soft smile crossing his lips. "You don't have to do it alone." And for the first time in months, she believed him. The pain still lingered, but it wasn't as suffocating. She wasn't trapped by her past anymore. She was ready to step into whatever came next, even if it meant taking that first step into the unknown. Life had begun to feel like it was finally falling back into place. The woman, once shattered by betrayal, now found herself stronger, more self-assured. Her days at the cafe felt less like an escape, and more like a chance to build something of her own. The man who had entered her life like a whisper had now become a constant presence, not just in the cafe, but in her life. They spent more time together, laughter, quiet moments, shared silences. There was an undeniable connection between them. Yet, despite this new sense of security, there was something unsettled within her. It lingered at the edges of her mind like a question she couldn't quite ask. And then one evening, as they were walking along the riverbank near the city, the man stopped. His gaze was serious, a rare heaviness in his eyes. "There's something I need to tell you," he said quietly. Her heart skipped, a mixture of anticipation and dread filling her chest. "What is it?" she asked, but she feared the answer. She was not prepared for the revelation he was about to share. He took a deep breath, and for a moment she thought he might back out. But instead, his words cut through the night air. "I haven't been entirely honest with you," he said, his voice filled with a depth she hadn't heard before. She looked at him, her heart pounding in her chest. "What do you mean?" she whispered, the question catching in her throat. The man turned to face her, his eyes filled with both regret and something more, something she couldn't quite name. "I'm not just some stranger who happened to cross your path," he continued. "I knew your ex-fiancé." The words hit her like a slap. Her breath caught in her throat, her mind struggling to comprehend what he was saying. "What do you mean you knew him?" she asked, her voice trembling. "How could you not have told me?" The man's gaze softened. "It's complicated," he murmured, "but it's something I should have shared with you long ago." The silence between them stretched, thick and heavy. Her mind raced, each thought colliding with the next. How could this man, someone she had come to trust, have been connected to the very person who had hurt her so deeply? "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away, his eyes distant as though he were reliving something painful. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and hesitant. "Since the beginning." Her breath caught in her throat, the weight of his words sinking in. "You knew all this time?" she asked, anger rising in her chest. "Why didn't you tell me?" His gaze met hers, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. "I was trying to protect you," he said quietly. "I didn't want to add to your pain, but the truth is I've always known him, since we were children. I didn't want you to hate me for something that wasn't my fault." The revelation hit her like a tidal wave. He had been caught between two worlds, and she had never known. Her heart ached with the realization that the very person she had begun to trust had been hiding a part of himself all along. The words he had spoken haunted her all night, lingering in her mind like an unanswered question. She sat at the window, staring out at the city, the cool air brushing against her skin. How had she not seen the signs? She had trusted him, believed that his presence in her life was the one thing that could heal her. But now, she wasn't so sure. He had known the man who had broken her heart, and for how long? Had everything between them been a lie? Her thoughts spiraled, each one more painful than the last. The weight of his confession was unbearable, and yet, she couldn't deny the connection she still felt with him. He had been there for her just as she had been for him. Could she let go of the past, or was she just setting herself up for more pain? The man's voice echoed in her mind, and despite everything, she couldn't help but wonder if he had truly been trying to protect her. She didn't have the answers, but she knew one thing for sure. This revelation had shaken everything she thought she knew. The following days were filled with a tension neither of them could ignore. She couldn't shake the thoughts of betrayal, even if it wasn't his fault. He had kept a secret from her, and that secret had changed everything. But there were moments when she could still see the man she had come to care for, the one who had offered her comfort and solace. Maybe he hadn't been entirely honest with her, but he had never lied about his feelings. And now, she stood at a crossroads. Could she move past this, or had the past already destroyed everything between them? One evening, as they sat together in the cafe, the man turned to her. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have told you the truth from the beginning, but I was afraid you wouldn't look at me the same way. I never wanted to hurt you." Her heart ached as she looked into his eyes, seeing the sincerity there. She didn't know if she could forgive him yet, but she knew she wasn't ready to walk away. "I need time," she whispered, her voice soft. "But I'm not ready to give up on us." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step. The night was heavy with silence, the weight of everything they had been through settling between them. The bride stared at the man, her eyes searching his face for something, any sign that they could overcome what had happened, that there was still hope for them. She had thought that forgiveness would be easy, that letting go of the past would come naturally, but it hadn't. It wasn't just the betrayal she was struggling with. It was the fear that letting him back into her heart might break her again. He had hurt her, yes, but there was more at play than just that. She had been scared of feeling anything, scared of trusting again. But here, in this moment, with him looking at her, as if he was willing to do whatever it took to make things right, something inside her shifted. She took a deep breath, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know if I can ever forget, but I want to try. I want to see where this can go. His eyes softened, a flash of hope crossing his features. We'll take it one day at a time, he said, his voice steady. But there was an urgency in it, as if he feared this moment slipping away. The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet conversations and tentative steps forward. They spent time together, finding a new rhythm in their relationship, one that wasn't built on promises or expectations, but on mutual understanding. Tension between them slowly faded, but the question remained, could they build something lasting from the broken pieces of their past? She found herself laughing more, her heart lighter than it had been in months. Still, there were moments of doubt, moments where the weight of everything that had happened threatened to pull them apart. It was on one of those days, as they walked through the park, when the man suddenly stopped and turned to her. His face was serious again, his brow furrowed with something unsaid. I need to tell you something, he said, his voice tight with emotion. Her heart skipped a beat. Had something changed again? Was he pulling away? What is it? She asked, her breath catching. His expression softened, but the words that came next would forever change the direction of their future. He took a deep breath before speaking again, and for a moment she thought he might not continue. But then he spoke, his voice trembling with sincerity. I love you, he said, the words hanging in the air between them. I've loved you for a long time, even before all of this, before everything that happened. The world seemed to stop for a moment, the noise of the city fading into the background as her mind processed his words. She had never expected to hear him say this, not after everything that had happened, not after the lies and the secrets. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her heart raced, her thoughts a whirlwind of emotions. Could she allow herself to believe him? Could she let herself love him again despite the hurt? The man reached for her hand, his grip gentle but firm. I know I've hurt you, he said softly. But I'm not the same person I was. I'll spend my life showing you that. Her heart pounded in her chest as she listened to his words, her mind racing to catch up with the emotions flooding through her. He loved her. Despite everything that had happened, despite the lies and betrayals, he loved her. And for the first time since their worlds had collided, she realized that she still loved him too. Not just the man he had been, but the person he was now, the one who had shown up time and time again, with honesty and vulnerability. But that didn't mean it would be easy. She still carried the weight of the past, the scars from the betrayal, and part of her feared that trusting him again would only lead to more heartbreak. But deep down, she knew she couldn't keep living in fear. She had to take the leap, to believe that love could rebuild what had been broken. I love you too, she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. And I want to try. I want to see if we can make this work. The days that followed were full of quiet revelations, small moments of growth that were building something stronger than before. They took things slowly, learning to trust again, to forgive, to love with the knowledge that nothing would ever be perfect. And as the weeks passed, the pain of the past faded, replaced by the promise of a future that was theirs to create. The man proved himself every day, his actions speaking louder than words, his dedication to making things right showing in every small gesture. Slowly, the trust between them grew, and the relationship they built began to feel like something unbreakable. On a warm summer evening, they found themselves standing on the same park path where he had confessed his love. The man took her hand, looking at her with a mix of awe and admiration. I know we still have a long way to go, he said, his voice filled with certainty, but I'm here for the journey. The bride smiled, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in a long time. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, she believed in the possibility of a future together. So am I, she whispered. Time had passed, and with it, the couple had grown, together and individually. The pain of the past had become a distant memory, replaced by a love that felt deeper and more secure than anything she had ever known. The bride had rediscovered herself in the arms of the man she had once doubted, finding not just solace in his presence but strength. They shared quiet moments, simple conversations, and a mutual respect that built a foundation stronger than the fragile promises of their past. But despite the peace they had found, there was still the matter of the future. She had once feared the unknown, but now it was something she felt ready to face. "We've come so far," she said one evening, her voice filled with quiet admiration. "It doesn't feel like it was ever this hard." The man smiled, his gaze steady as he held her hand. "It was hard, but the hardest things often bring the most rewarding outcomes." She nodded, taking in his words. She felt the truth in them. "I'm not scared anymore," she whispered. The weight of her fears lifted. Their lives were slowly weaving into a new routine, one where the past no longer defined them. The man had earned her trust completely, and with it, the future seemed full of possibilities. They talked openly now, about their hopes, their dreams, and even their fears. They had become a team in every sense of the word, not just two people in love, but two people who supported each other in every way. The bride had come to understand that love wasn't just about the highs, it was about facing the lows together. As they spent the evening together in the quiet of their home, the man turned to her with a thoughtful expression. "What do you see when you look at us?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. The bride thought for a moment, a soft smile forming on her lips. "I see strength," she said. "I see something that will endure, something built on honesty and the willingness to fight for each other." His eyes softened, and he leaned in to kiss her forehead. "I couldn't agree more." The future that had once seemed so uncertain was now something she could look forward to. Together they had rebuilt not just their relationship, but themselves. The woman had rediscovered her own strength, finding peace in knowing that her happiness was no longer tied to another person's actions, but to her own growth. She had healed, in a way that was deep and lasting. And the man who had once been the source of her pain had become her partner in every sense of the word. They shared more than love. They shared a bond that no betrayal could ever truly break. But life, as it always does, had its twists. One day, the woman received a letter. It was from the ex-fiancé, the man who had once promised her forever. She hadn't thought about him in a long time, but the letter stirred something inside her. When she opened it, she found not an apology, but an acknowledgement of what had happened. Acknowledgement that he had never deserved her. She stared at the words, feeling no anger, no sorrow, just a quiet sense of closure. She had moved on, and it was time to put the past fully to rest. As the months passed, the bride and the man continued to grow, not just as a couple, but as individuals. They had both learned the importance of communication, of trust, and of vulnerability. The woman, once burdened by the weight of her past, now felt lighter, more certain of who she was. And the man, having proven his love through his actions, had earned her heart in ways words could never express. They traveled together, experienced new things, and shared dreams of a future filled with laughter, love, and adventure. But it was one simple afternoon, while sitting together by the ocean, that the man turned to her with a look in his eyes that made her heart skip a beat. "Will you marry me?" he asked. The question simple but profound. She blinked in surprise, her breath catching. She had always wondered if they could truly move past their past. But now, standing in this moment, she realized they had already built something more solid than anything she could have imagined. "Yes," she whispered, the answer coming easily. "I will." The proposal marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with hope, laughter, and the deep knowing that love, while never perfect, could endure. The woman knew that challenges would come, as they always did, but now she felt ready to face them, because she knew she had someone by her side who loved her with all his heart. The months leading to their wedding were filled with joy and excitement, but also quiet moments of reflection. She thought back to the broken pieces of her heart and how, over time, those pieces had been gathered up and put back together in a new way. Not by someone else's hands, but by her own strength, with the man she had come to love beside her. On their wedding day, She walked down the aisle with the knowledge that this time there was no illusion, no fear of betrayal. Just love, strong and unwavering. And as they exchanged their vows, she realized that love, in all its messy, complicated glory, was exactly what she had always needed. "I do," she whispered, her voice steady. "I do." The years that followed were filled with love and laughter. The couple had built a life together, one that was strong and full of promise. The woman had become not just his partner, but his confidant, his best friend. They had traveled, started new adventures, and faced the inevitable challenges that life threw their way. But no matter what, they had always faced it together. Their bond was unbreakable, founded not just on love, but on a mutual respect and understanding that had blossomed from the painful lessons of their past. One evening, as they sat in the garden of their home, watching the sunset together, the woman turned to him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "You know," she said, her voice filled with quiet affection, "I never thought I'd be here like this. Happy. Whole." He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. "We've made it, haven't we?" he said, his voice steady and warm. "We've made something beautiful out of everything that came before." And in that moment, she knew that their love, despite all the trials, had become everything they had ever dreamed of. They had built a life, brick by brick, from the ashes of their former selves. The pain, the betrayal, the lies, they were all behind them now, replaced by a love that was deeper than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And that was enough. The couple had learned that life wasn't about avoiding the storms. It was about standing strong together when they came. They had faced the storm and come out stronger. It was a love forged through fire, and it had tempered them both into something unbreakable. One morning, as they stood together in the kitchen, cooking breakfast, the woman caught the man's eye, a playful grin spreading across her face. "Do you remember when we first met?" she asked, her voice light. He paused, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I remember," he said, his tone filled with warmth. "I remember thinking how lucky I was that you gave me a chance." She laughed softly, reaching for the pancake batter. "I'm lucky too," she said. "But we had to go through a lot to get here." He nodded, his gaze soft and full of affection. "And it was worth every step." As time went on, the couple continued to build their dreams. They had found a rhythm, a balance between their love for each other and their individual pursuits. The woman had started a new career, one that was fulfilling and allowed her to grow, while the man supported her every step of the way. They had learned to give each other space, to chase their passions while still remaining connected. They had built a home, a sanctuary that was theirs, and within those walls, they had created a family of their own, one filled with laughter, respect, and unconditional love. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through their home, the man paused in front of a photo frame on the wall. "Do you remember this?" he asked, his voice filled with nostalgia. It was a picture from their wedding day, both of them looking so young and full of hope. She smiled, her eyes softening. "How could I forget?" she said. "That was the beginning of everything." He nodded, his hand resting on hers. "And it was worth the wait." It had been years since the wedding, and now the couple stood at the edge of a new chapter. Their love had flourished, growing even stronger as they built a life together. Yet, there was always a part of the woman's heart that remembered the journey, the pain, the heartbreak, the uncertainty, and how far they had come. It had all led them here, to this moment of calm and certainty. As they stood together, holding hands and gazing out over a beautiful vista, the woman turned to the man, her eyes soft. "Do you ever wonder what our lives would have been like if we hadn't met?" she asked, her voice filled with curiosity. The man turned to her, a smile tugging at his lips. "No," he said firmly. "I don't wonder, because this is the life I was meant to have." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "I feel the same way," she said softly. "We're exactly where we were meant to be." And in that moment, she knew that no matter what life held in store, they would face it together. Years from that day when they first met, the couple had found a love deeper than either of them had ever imagined. They had learned the meaning of patience, forgiveness, and trust. They had built a life, brick by brick, and though it wasn't always perfect, it was theirs, imperfectly beautiful in every way. One evening, as they sat together watching the stars, the woman leaned her head against the man's shoulder. He kissed her hair and she sighed contentedly. "I'm glad it was you," she whispered. "I'm glad it was always you." He smiled, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "It was always meant to be," he said quietly. And she believed him. As the night stretched on, they sat together, side by side, knowing that the journey ahead would be just as full of love as the one they had already traveled. And for the first time in her life, she knew with certainty that love, real love, was the greatest adventure of all.